Hey everybody, we're back for chapter 10 on motivation and effect. We're going to take a look at a couple of key concepts. So let's jump right in. So first of all, like the title says, we're going to be talking about motivation and effect. The first thing we should probably do is make some operational definitions of the two words. Motivation, basically the degree to which students desire to succeed, right? So if someone is highly motivated, they are really, they're go-getters and they just want to do as well as they can because of reasons in quotations, and we'll talk about those quote-unquote reasons in a minute. Now, affect could be a relatively new term, especially if you haven't taken a lot of educational psychology, but it basically has to do with the student, how they feel on the inside, emotional, mood, and personal feelings, right? So it's how do you feel about yourself? How do you feel about your ability to succeed? So, going back to motivation, we were talking about we really want to do stuff because of reasons. Really, you have two reasons. You have intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. You're probably more familiar with extrinsic motivation because we've done a lot of things with reward systems, etc., that we use for classroom management. And we have grades. That's a extrinsic motivating factor. You want to you work hard because you want to get an A. It's about the A. It's not really what does the A signify other than the fact that you did and you got a certain amount of points over a certain amount of points. Now, intrinsic motivation is actually a deeper level of motivation where we don't do things for the A, we don't do things for the reward, we're not working for the paycheck, we're doing things because that's what we want to do, right? We're motivated on the inside to want to do this because that's something that in our heart we are driven for, whatever reason. It could have been a personal experience, it could be for the love of a family member, or based on something that makes you you, right? So a lot of times people get into education because they're intrinsically motivated to want to affect and provide help to kids in their lives, right? We're not doing it for the extrinsic motivation of our huge paychecks. We're doing it because we want to make lives better, for the kids, and we want to contribute to our community, right? And that's more than any of the extrinsic motivators that people in higher paying fields are often drawn towards. Now, when we talk about the relationship between motivation and effect, although they do overlap, we can have students who are relatively low motivation but relatively high effect, and conversely we can have students who are relatively high motivation and low effect. Let's say, for example, a gifted student very often can be very low motivation but high effect, right? So when we're talking about effect, we're talking about one's own ability, right? One's own perception of their abilities and their confidence in being able to perform or utilize said abilities or what have you. So you can have a student, a gifted student, who give them a math worksheet, okay? They may have a very high effect towards the worksheet because it's like, I can do this, one hand behind my back and asleep and blindfolded because I'm good at math. But they could have a very low motivation to want to do it because, this again, I really am just over the worksheets. Conversely, you could have a student who has a very high motivation. Like, boy, I really, really want to, I want to do this. I'm determined to do this, and, that's what I want more than anything in the world. But they can have relatively low effect because they have serious self-doubt in their abilities, and they're unsure of of themselves and their ability to be able to actually do said things, and that can affect how they feel about themselves. The example I like to give is from Monsters University. It's a Disney movie. Mike Wazowski. Okay, Mike Wazowski is an example of someone who has very high motivation. He wants to be the best scarer, and maybe I'm misinterpreting the movie here, but take it for what it's worth. Mike Wazowski wants to be the best scarer, and he's going to work just as hard as he can and everything. But when he gets to the actual scare meter or things like that, you know, he notices that, you know, it's not working, and he has a lot of self-doubt. And you know, all the people in whatever the little scarer frat is, I forget the movie specifically, but you know, they have a lot of self-doubt. They don't feel very good about themselves. Yes, they want to be scarers, but they don't feel as though they can. Those people have high motivation and low effect. So while they do overlap, you can have students with high motivation and low effect, you can have students with low motivation and high effect, but you can also have students with both low motivation and effect as well. So we're talking about students with disabilities. Okay, first of all, the students can be relatively low motivated. First of all, if we're not properly providing either reward systems, either extrinsic or intrinsic reward systems, if we don't understand a purpose for something, we're not going to want to do it because maybe we did not clarify or, you know, put clear enough rationale or protocol. You know, if we don't understand why we're doing something, we're not going to be motivated to do it because it's like, well, I guess I'm just doing this. But also, students with disabilities can have very effective types or affective deficits because, well, and it's very natural to think, you know, many students with disabilities have had, you know, hardships in their lives, and they've had problems, and they've had failure, they've had repeated failure, oftentimes for years and years and years. That it wears on the psyche, it wears on the spirit, and it wears on your affect. After having failure, you no longer feel as though you have confidence in your abilities to be able to perform a specific task. So when both of these come together, where it's like, you know, not only do you have an affective deficit where you don't feel as though you can do it, that carries over into a motivational deficit where it's like, I don't want to do it because what am I getting out of it? I'm not succeeding, I'm not learning what I want to learn, not even what I want to learn, I'm not learning what I need to learn, it's not paying off for me on tests, I'm not getting the outcome or the results or the rewards that I'm looking for, there's no point. And this is systematic, and this comes after many, many years. And when you look at dropout rates, you look at things, most second graders don't have low motivation, or first graders, they don't have low motivation in effect because they're still starry-eyed, you know, newbies, and they think, you know, all things are possible and I can do this. But, you know, first grade, second grade, third grade, it deteriorates. By the time you get to middle school, I've been at this for 6 years and nothing's happened. Why is this going to change? And then we wonder why kids tune out. It's very simple. So what are some preconditions? First of all, we need to provide an environment that's going to foster both high motivation and effect. First of all, effect. That's something that we can absolutely help increase in our students. You can do this. You do have skills that you can do well. We can provide them developmentally appropriate activities. We can provide them systematic positive reinforcement. That's going to ultimately show that, yes, see, look, you can do that. You've done this, you've done this, you've done this. And we're starting to get the pattern of I can versus I can't. That's how you feel about yourself and your abilities. Affective principles. Now, motivation is a little bit different because everybody has subjects that they like and subjects that they don't like. And they have subjects that they're good at and subjects that they're not good at. This is not a disability issue, this is an education issue. We have to be relatively, we have to be flexible, first of all, in how we are, number one, providing direct instruction, and number two, how we are rewarding students, and number three, what sort of choices are we giving for guided practice, independent practice, or any sort of enrichment group or other sorts of interactive activities that students can do, because I mean that's how we're really going to increase motivation. Remember that motivation is both intrinsic and extrinsic. So to increase extrinsic motivation, which oftentimes comes first, we have to provide an effective reward system. After we show and have proven to students that they are capable, and we get the affect up a little bit, we then try to transition from extrinsic motivation to intrinsic motivation, right? You want to do this because you like it, you want to improve, you want to get better, or, you know, any reason. And don't expect that for every subject. I'm never going to be intrinsically motivated by, you know, X subject. And that's okay. That's just what makes us us. There's things that we like, and there's things that we're good at, and there's things that we hate, and there's things that we aren't good at. But knowing the difference and understanding that we do have both of these techniques, intrinsic and extrinsic, is going to help us pinpoint what are we going to be targeting on this specific exercise, this project, or what have you. Now, the idea of an appropriate difficulty level, right? So first of all, we have this idea of scaffolding, where we need to put new learning on top of old learning. But also, when you guys take Ed Reading 400 and 430 and you do running records, you're going to have this concept of instructional level, independent level, and frustrational level. We do not want to give activities that are too easy, because that's going to be a relatively low motivation activity, because this is too easy, right? I can do this, this is not fun, I'm not getting anything out of it. I know I can do it. It's a high effective activity, but very low motivation. Also, if we give things that are too hard too much, not only are students going to have low motivation because it's like, this is too hard, I don't want to do it, right? I'm struggling, I don't like, you know, being wrong, any of the things that you can feel when you struggle and when you have a hard time with something. But if you do it too much, that can start to negatively affect, or effect with an E, the affective with an A status of the student. Whereas if they struggle too much, they're going to then start to develop the self-doubt. They're going to doubt their abilities, and their confidence in their ability to be able to do things is going to go down, which is going to cause an affective deficit in the classroom. So we have to make sure developmentally appropriate stuff is, I mean, that's key, because it needs to be just the right amount of difficulty, some easy stuff for review, but then to learn things, you know, we have to have a certain amount of challenge, first of all for motivation, but secondly to learn new things on top of old things. Also, the idea of meaningful and relevant things that we want to do. Nobody likes to do repetitive tasks. Nobody likes to do mindless tasks that might be below or even above their skill level. If we can do things that relate to things that students like, or the things that students are good at, those are going to be things that students are going to be more interested in than just some random topic that we pick. And then the idea of task-oriented classrooms. Task-orientedness comes with goals, where we complete, right, we have the mindset that we're doing this to get, you know, outcome X, and that can be whatever it is. This, which is the criteria, and the outcome, you know, that's interchangeable. You can put whatever you want there, and it's going to be the same type of a principle. Also, this idea of positive peer support. I've always tried to maintain a level head, especially in the classroom with young kids, especially young kids that might have learning problems, but I cannot help but get on students that belittle or make fun of other students for being wrong and for going through a natural learning process, and that's something that I am relatively not aggressive, but certainly assertive, and I nip that very immediately, because what we do not want to do, that has to go with fostering the safe environment. If a student doesn't feel safe, going back to the 80-20 rule, if a student doesn't feel safe to get that new 20% of learning that's going to be more instructional, not quite frustrational, but just instructional enough so it's more advanced and they need our help to be able to understand and master it, that comes with a learning process. Nobody's going to be right 100% of the time, and the people who are right 100% of the time, maybe they're not being given of developmentally appropriate materials and activities, so maybe that's something that we need to think of. But always have, and this is a good class rule in the first place, have the expectation that this is a learning environment, and beyond that, this is a safe environment for you to be able to ask questions, make mistakes, think, try, trial and error, because we're all going to have something that we're not good at some point. And if you don't like, or for example, if you make Timmy feel bad because they get bad, you laugh at him because he can't do division, what's going to happen when you're struggling on this specific part of grammar, or this specific, phonetic sound or digraph or a blend or something like that? Do you want people making fun of you? Then why are you making fun of them? Everybody's here to learn. If there is nothing here to learn, there'd be no point for us to be here. You'd be in the next grade, or you wouldn't, you'd be out of school if you knew everything that there is to learn. I'm a teacher and I'm still learning, and there's things that I'm learning and that I fail at and I challenge myself with every day. That's normal. So fostering that it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to ask questions, and that there aren't stupid questions. And that goes beyond making statements. So not only should we make statements, but we need to provide specific examples. And I did the thing where you make an example out of a situation. But beyond statements, because that's just you trying to tell someone, try to get them to elicit their own personal experiences. Reflect on an experience that you've struggled. Reflect on an experience where you've seen someone struggle. How did you feel? How do you think that particular person felt? Is school supposed to be easy? Are you supposed to get everything on the first try right away? If you did, what would be the point of us being here? So it's reasonable to think that we should have struggling. So not only by statements, but by eliciting reflection, we can get them to personalize that sort of mindset, and they can empathize with people as they're learning and going from an instructional level to an independent level. So we talked about the 80-20 and the idea of appropriate difficulty. If things are too easy, it will not be motivating. If things are too hard and chronically too hard, it will ultimately have a detrimental effect with an E on a student's affective, with an A, view of themselves. If everything's too hard, after a amount of time you give up because I can't do this. Saying I can't do this isn't a motivation thing, it's an effective thing. So we talked about meaningful tasks. It's not always relevant, or it's not always possible to have everything that students like all the time, because I know that the text tries to say, and it's a good general principle, and if you can do things, that's good. But at the same time, when you have boys and girls, some people that like trucks, some people that like the easy bake, some people that like sports, some people that like football, some people that like ice skating. It's hard to please everybody. But at the same time, you can use especially things, like for example in the second point, use things that the students can relate to. And what can everybody relate to? Things in their community, right? Things that everybody grows up with, things that everybody experiences, things that people see on a regular basis. So if we can take things out of the classroom and into the real world, we're going to be providing more motivating types of activities, because it's the equivalent. When am I ever going to use this, right? If you had $1 for every time you've heard that. If you can, off of the bat, explain how are you going to use this, like on the last point, and it needs to go beyond explaining. We need to get students to reflect. We need to ask effective questions that the answer will lead to, we need to do what we're learning to come to that outcome or result. And for example, why is X important? Well, consider this situation. Have you ever had situation X? You need to perform Y. What sort of things that you can do to get to Z outcome? And so it's not you saying, this is good because you're the adult. Right? You're not talking in their own experiences, you're talking from your experiences. That is a key mistake a lot of people make. If we all listen to our parents, if we all listen to the elders that tell us what to do, we would never make mistakes. But many of you guys in college, I'm sure you guys have had experiences where, gosh, if I just would have listened, I wouldn't have had this issue. Everybody has that issue. I have this issue. Every single person has this issue. We learn more from our own struggles than from listening to other people's struggles. So if we can create that scenario where we may be struggling and we need a specific skill, strategy, or something that we're trying to teach to be able to complete or to deal with an actual scenario, problem, or something that's going to affect our life, that's going to increase the motivation, because it's like, wow, I really do need this. Oh, I'm actually using this in a relevant way. So pretty quickly, as far as strategies, first of all, and I guess this goes a little bit with the positive supports, the idea of trying to build one's own confidence in each other or in themselves. First of all, we need to break the systematic failure that a lot of students have, and we do that with developmentally appropriate activities. We give things that students can succeed on. We give things that students do know, and we can build on that. Oftentimes, and especially for students that are behind, they may be relatively instructional on basic materials, but if you try to, okay, for example, 4th grade math. If you don't know your basic multiplication tables, the likelihood of you doing multi-digit multiplication and long division, 0% chance of success without a calculator. That can be very effectively damaging, because it's like, gosh, I can't do this. But if you provide the type of reinforcement on the basic skills, and it's like, see, you can do this, you know this, and then we gradually incorporate the new steps into the old steps while still reinforcing the old knowledge that might be a deficit area. That's going to increase that student's ability or confidence in their ability to be able to complete that task. And that's gonna end up good for everybody, because I mean, their performance is gonna go up, their motivation is gonna go up, their confidence in their own abilities is gonna go up, and it's a snowball effect. It's a snowball going uphill. Now, the idea of goal setting. Goal setting is absolutely appropriate for trying to build motivation. And it can also increase one's own effective identity of themselves. But goals can equally be destructive. We need to use appropriate goals. We need to know what is something realistic that a student can reach. We need to start very short term. And if we're trying to dig out of a big hole or a big deficit, we cannot take too big of a bite. This is a very common thing that a lot of teachers do, is that we're going to increase 3 grade levels this year, because even if you're 3 levels behind, we need to get you 3 levels up. So the goal is to get 3 levels up. It sounds nice on paper, but is that something that's realistic? At the end of the year, when the student doesn't get 3 levels up on reading, not only did they not meet their goal, but they're going to feel bad about themselves, because it's like, dang, I failed the goal, I failed again, I knew I couldn't do it. And that's an effective deficit. That's going to affect with an E one's affect with an A. This is something big that happens in weight loss a lot. I know from personal experience, because my dad struggled with weight and ended up passing from weight-related complications to his health. Okay, when you're 500 and some pounds, it's not a realistic goal to say I'm going to get back to my college weight at 250 or to whatever. Anyways, because you can work as hard as you can lose 75 pounds, and this is kind of a real story actually. You can lose 75 to 100 pounds. Anybody who loses 75 to 100 pounds should be very proud of their accomplishment. They have accomplished something great. They have lost a 10-year-old child or more, older, in a significant amount of weight. Right? Someone who is, 260 pounds and loses 75 pounds. They're going to go from being, overweight to being, really fit. If they're, 6, if they're as tall as me, 6'1", that's, you're going to get in pretty good shape. For someone like my dad,
he would lose 75, lose 75 pounds. It's like, darn, I'm still 400 and some, I'm still 470 pounds. I'm still fat. I'm still a failure. And these are real feelings that this man felt. And it affected him with an E very negatively in his own affect with an A, in his confidence, in his ability to be able to go back to his predetermined weight that he had set for himself. Which is sad, because he had this all planned out by dietitians and all these quote-unquote health specialists, so whatever that's worth. What would have been a better goal? A better goal would have been, let's lose 3 pounds this week. Let's lose 3 pounds next week. Let's try to lose 10 pounds this month. We're not focusing on the end goal. When we have an elephant, and that's an old saying, I know, but if you're trying to eat an elephant, it's hard to see the end of the elephant. You have to eat the elephant one bite at a time. And when you have students that are 2, 3, or more years behind, they are trying to eat an elephant. So we have to provide them goals in bite-sized chunks that they can see their progress, and they can not necessarily, and don't have them, like, keep them from the end goal. We'll get there when we get there. That's not a motivating factor to say, oh, I need to get to my grade level, because you know what? That's going to take too much time, and the idea of emotional burnout is going to happen. We only have so much patience. Mother Teresa only had so much patience. Okay, something that's going to take years and years to be able to overcome. It would take a superhuman patience to be able to last that long, because you have that end goal of that number in your head, and at every checkpoint, fail, 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 on and on and on. How much failure can one person take before they break? But if we said lose 3 pounds, let's use academics. We need to go from 40 words per minute to 80 words per minute. Let's get to 42 words per minute. Let's get to 44 words per minute. Let's get to 46 words per minute. Let's gain 2 words this week. If that's too much, let's gain 1 word this week. Let's gain 1.5 words, or 3 words over the next 2 weeks, 1.5 words a week. Make it so that a student, first of all, is being pushed, developmentally appropriate, but at the same time, you need them to be able to feel that success. I mean, success, it's the same, the feeling of success is the same thing in our brain, right, that affects our mood, right? It's the same pleasure center that people who, it's the same pleasure center as sex, it's the same pleasure center as people who drink or use drugs. It's a pleasure center. When you succeed, you feel good about yourself. Your brain releases a little bit of dopamine because you feel good about yourself. It's a sense of accomplishment. It's a reward center. If we're not providing the brain with something that's going to feed its need for a reward center, we are not going to maintain long-term motivation.
So increasing students' personal investment in the classroom. This has to do with both motivation and effect. Right, first of all, we talked about this in Chapter 9. Some students feel as though they don't belong in the classroom because they're not being included to the maximum extent that they can and should be incorporated. This is going to have a carryover effect to their thought, or their perception of their own ability to be able to do other things. Affect, right? Also, if students don't feel as though they're getting something positive, or some sort of positive, either extrinsically or intrinsically, they're not going to be motivated to want to continue to participate and engage in this community type of a setting of a classroom. So we have to give students ownership, give them choices, give them the ability to take ownership, right? Give them the opportunity to take ownership of their rules, give them the opportunity to take ownership over group types of projects. Yes, we have to have some things routine, like schedules and curriculum maps and things like that, but if we can at all get away from it, give students choice. When they get to choose, it's going to inherently be higher motivation because it's either something they're good at or it's something that they like. And when I say choose, it's like, oh, can I do math today, yes or no? No, that's not it.
when you're doing math, you can either do, if you need basic fact practice, you can either do the worksheet, you could do, Speed Racer math. I don't know if they still have that game. It was an old Apple IIe game. Well, they don't have Apple IIes anymore. But, Number Munchers. You can play the computer game. You can do blocks if you're a little kid. You can use iPad games. You can do 4 or 5 ways of doing a particular task or practicing a specific task. It's either what they like or what they're particularly good at, or they gravitate towards. Those are the things that we should give that particular option, especially if it doesn't make any difference to us. Now, praise. We need to take a balanced approach to student praise. Continual, systematic feedback is always good, but it needs to be meaningful. Students don't want to hear, okay, don't give students participation trophies in verbal form, okay? If they did something good, you need to tell them specifically what they did well, and specifically like what part of what they did was good. Like, you're a winner, you're awesome. Why? Kids are smart. They will see through patronizing praise, like, oh, good job, yeah. It works. It can work for a 2-year-old. Once you start getting into any kind of age where kids can communicate back, it doesn't work anymore, because they're going to see right through that. If they do something good, tell them that they did that particular thing good. Yes, you can go after that and say, you're awesome, and I'm glad that you're here. And you can make more general types of praises, but you can't just go around being, giving high fives for the sake of high fives. I mean, you can give high five for the sake of high five, but don't do it in the name of praise if they didn't do anything praiseworthy, because first, that's not going to be it's not going to get the response that you want. If students know that they didn't do anything receiving praise and they get praise, the next time that they get praise, it's going to have a diminished effect. And we're going to talk about this with reward systems. It's not going to mean the same thing, because it's like, oh, you say that to everybody, you say that about everything. So when they do something legitimately good and praiseworthy, they get this meh type of reaction, because, oh, they're just saying that, they're trying to make me feel good. What's the deal here? So we talked about this, the idea that we need to give specific and genuine praise, not general patronizing praise. Now we're talking about rewards, right? Reward is the opposite of punishment, right? Reward reinforces a positive outcome. In this instance, it could be some sort of success for the student. But if we use an award or a reward not for that, we're going to have the same thing where we get for praise, where it's just, where's my piece of candy, right? If we use it too much, then it's going to lose its effect. For example, if a student's struggling and they've really overcome and gone over the hurdle, and they get X% on a test, if they get 90% on that test, you're going to get computer time. Well, that's something to work forward. And when they hit 90%, man, they earned that, and it's going to feel so good them sitting on the computer, because I did this through my own sweat, my own trials, and I'm here because I can do it. That's both positive on one's own affective image, affect with an A, and it's also going to be, yes, extrinsically motivating, because they want to do well so they can get the computer time. But initially or eventually, if we do that enough and with the right subject, we're going to see that start to transition. It's like, wow, I want to learn this because I need to use it in my life. I want to use this because need this for college, for the next step in my life, for any of a number of reasons that don't have to be about the points, the grades, or the rewards. Something about anything about self-betterment. Right. And that's what we're ultimately trying to gradually release and transition people from extrinsic to intrinsic types of rewards. So, just to advance a little bit on this rewards versus bribes
Yes, I understand the whole idea of bribes, getting someone to do something that's like not necessarily good. Like for example, you bribe a politician, it's to get them to pass your bill. Well, there's also a more benign definition of bribe, right? Sometimes teachers bribe their students in behaving. It's like, okay, if you all sit here quietly during read aloud, you're all gonna get a cupcake. Well, are they learning anything? Are they gaining any sort of educational outcome because of that? Is that doing anything to increase their affect, or their confidence in their ability to be able to do something? Is that doing anything to increase their own intrinsic motivation? Is it even extrinsically motivating to related to the educational activity? Well, yes, to a certain extent, it is extrinsically motivating because you're doing something to get something that's not an internal benefit, yes. But once again, it's an overuse of the reward. So how can we effectively reward? We have to set up specific conditions for the reward. Like for example, if you get over a 90% on the test, you can get 5 minutes on the computer during free time. That's a specific condition.
If you go through the week with 2 or less, or okay, if you go through the week with 0 behavior referrals, you get extra recess on Friday. If you do X, you will get Y. The X has to be something that you have to be working towards it, and it has to be something that students actually like in the first place. Also, we have to understand that criteria sometimes has to be adjusted a little bit, especially if we have students with disabilities, especially if we have students with a behavior plan. Some students, and I guess we can go into this next idea about fairness, some students need different things than other students. I know that's a very general statement. This is where we get into this idea of fairness versus equality versus equity. The idea that we need to give every student what they need, and that doesn't mean giving every student the same thing. A student with an emotional disability may need a very prescriptive reward system for good behavior. They may be the only person in the class that needs that particular system because that's what they respond to, and that's what's helping them increase desired behaviors and subsequently decrease undesired behaviors. Another, students in the class might say, oh, well, why does Johnny get X every time? Why does Johnny get some goldfish every time that they sit quietly for a couple minutes? Because we're trying to teach Johnny that you need to do X, whatever it is. You know how to do X, right? We're not trying to work the same thing with you as we're trying to work with other students. I reward you for doing a good job on things that you're trying to work on. I'm rewarding this student for doing good things and succeeding at what they're trying to work on. Not everybody's working on the same thing, although we're having the same topic matter. That's the idea of differentiated instruction. We can have people that are working on more advanced levels of things. We can have people that are working on more basic levels of things. In the instance with emotion and behavior, we could have kids that are working on things that have nothing to do with the academic subject, but they're working on behavior things. They're working on emotional things. That is not something that everybody in the class needs to work on. So I don't want you to fall into the trap that if we're going to do a reward system, that has to be the same thing for everybody. Yes, we want to have general principles in the class, but they're going, first of all, some students aren't going to be motivated by the same things that other students are. Secondly, some students are going to have greater needs than other students and are going to need to be more extrinsically motivated than other students. That's a good information to know, and we shouldn't discount that just for the quote-unquote sake of fairness or equality. We need to give everybody what they need. So just to recap, We're talking about motivation and affect. Motivation is one's own desire to do well or to perform a certain task. Affect is one's own confidence or awareness of one's own abilities. We have intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation is where you do something for something tangible, and then intrinsic motivation is you do something for your own sake of self-betterment, learning, helping others, or whatever. You know, you're not necessarily getting anything tangible, but there's intangible interpersonal things that you are getting. Understand that they relate to each other, that someone can have high motivation and low affect and vice versa, and specific instances of that particular case. Understand that students with special needs oftentimes will have issues and deficits in both motivation and affect, partially because of systematic school failure, partially because of inability to provide developmentally appropriate instruction. There's quite a few reasons. Understand that we're trying to create a supportive and safe environment for students to learn. Understand that learning means making mistakes and learning from your mistakes more than it means just parroting back something that you hear in class. And that students need to be safe to be able to do that sort of thing. Understand this idea of the 80-20 rule and developmentally appropriate instruction that we need. We have independent level, we have instructional level, and we have instructional and frustrational level. Sorry, independent, instructional, frustrational. And we don't want to give too much independent work because it's going to be low motivation, because this is too easy. We don't want to give too much frustrational work, or we don't want to give frustrational work because if that's done over an extended period of time, that's going to have a negative impact on a student's affect. If we can make tasks meaningful and relate them to the actual community or the context in which they live and experience, that's going to be much more meaningful than just saying, oh, well, I say this because I'm the adult and I know better. And then also, if you can create, beyond making statements, if you can create situations and if you can elicit reflection and thought within your students as to give them a situation and then through effective questioning, get them to basically say that they need to do what it is you're trying to teach them, and that's going to be a highly motivating factor, because it's like, oh, I get why I need to use this. It's the old, you know, when am I going to use this? If you can provide a scenario where the students are basically saying that I need to use this before you even start, you're going to have them on board. So we talked about the use of praise and rewards, the idea that praise needs to be specific and not patronizing in general, because if you do general or ineffective praise, it's going to lose its effect. Same thing with rewards, just don't hand out rewards willy-nilly. They need to be a actual response for for some sort of progress. Go back to understand that understand the difference between rewards and bribes. Aside from what the book says about bribes being, you know, something we're trying to get students to do something negative, bribes can also be where you're trying to get the students to do something neutral or positive, but it's done not even as an extrinsic motivating factor, but it's like, okay, do this, get a piece of candy. Sit still, get some candy, because I don't want to deal with you, I don't want to manage you. It has to do with a lot of how we are seeing it. If we're using it as a bribe versus a reward, they're going to take it as a bribe versus taking it as a reward. And we had the idea of fairness, which is some students need more than other students. Some students are motivated by different things than other students. Some students are more intrinsically motivated, and they're not going to respond to extrinsic rewards as much as students who are more extrinsically motivated or who may be developing their own affect and their own motivation. So the idea of equality and fairness does not always mean everybody gets the same thing. Whereas the most truly equal thing that we can do is to give everybody what they need and what will help them succeed the most. And that's not the same thing. And it's oftentimes a variety of things. So it's not just one thing or two things, oftentimes it's many things. Okay, that's a quick rundown on Chapter 10 on motivation and affect. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you guys next time.